You know, usually when we sit down to talk about a $6 billion wager, we're talking about um, a hedge fund blowing up on Wall Street,
Right.
or maybe some massive tech acquisition in Silicon Valley where a company buys an app just to shut it down.
Yeah, exactly. It's usually corporate maneuvering, maybe financial speculation.
Exactly. But today, we are looking at a bet that is uh, fundamentally different. It is bigger than a company. It's bigger than just one industry. I want you to mentally fast forward, or actually, just look at your calendar, because
Mm.
we are here in February 2026. The location is Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Okay.
And the stakes, well, they are effectively the future sovereignty of an entire continent.
It sounds a little dramatic when you put it that way, but honestly, having looked at the source material for this deep dive, that is not an exaggeration.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking at the aftermath of the African Union's Science, Technology, and Innovation Week, STI Week.
And specifically, we are diving into a firsthand account and report from Dr. Alexandre Essome. He's the co-chair of the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Sustainable Development, or CAISD.
Right.
He was on the ground, in the room while these deals were being cut.
And what really strikes me about Dr. Essome's account is the tone. He isn't painting this picture of a polite, sleepy, diplomatic gathering
Yeah.
where everyone just shakes hands and goes home.
No.
He describes an atmosphere of absolute urgency. I mean, there's this palpable feeling that the window is closing.
That is the core tension here, right? For decades, the narrative around African talent has been one thing: brain drain.
Mm-hmm.
The best minds leave because the infrastructure just isn't there to support them. But this event in Addis Ababa, it feels like they were trying to flip that script entirely.
Completely.
They aren't asking for charity. They are trying to capitalize a strategy.
Specifically, a strategy called STISA 2034.
STISA 2034. I have to say, it sounds incredibly bureaucratic.
It really does.
Like something you'd find in the back of a filing cabinet.
It has that ring to it. But you have to look past the acronym. STISA stands for the Science, Technology, and Innovation Strategy for Africa. And Dr. Essome frames this not as paperwork, but as a roadmap for scientific sovereignty.
That phrase really jumped out at me, scientific sovereignty.
Yeah.
It implies that if you don't control your own science, you don't really control your own future.
Precisely. Think about it. If you are importing your medicines, if you're importing your seeds for crops and importing the algorithms that run your banking system,
They're vulnerable.
you're in a very precarious position. You are dependent on supply chains you don't control. And Dr. Essome's report emphasizes that this summit was about moving from talk to deeds because, to quote the CEO of AUDA-NEPAD, time is against the continent.
Time is against the continent. That is a haunting line.
It is.
It sets the stakes perfectly. So let's talk about the deed itself, the $6 billion number. That's the headline. AUDA-NEPAD is mobilizing to raise $6 billion over the next 12 months. That's an aggressive timeline for that amount of capital. What is the actual play here?
So, it's important to understand what this money is not for. It isn't for some venture capital fund to find the next African unicorn startup. It isn't about chasing the glamour of the tech world.
So no African version of TikTok or the next Instagram.
Not as the primary goal, no. The full cost of implementing STISA 2034 is estimated at roughly $6.8 billion.
Okay.
So this push to raise $6 billion is essentially trying to fund the entire infrastructure bill in one massive go. We are talking about existential plumbing here.
Plumbing.
Metaphorically speaking, yeah. We're talking about food security, climate resilience, hard infrastructure for research labs. Dr. Essome is very clear that the goal is to take fragmented pilot projects, things like health tech or space tech, that are working in one small village or one university department,
And scale them.
and scale them into continent-wide solutions.
It's the difference between having a cool prototype in a garage and having a functioning power grid that serves millions.
Exactly.
But here's the thing about these massive international summits. We have seen big pledges before. The G7, the UN people stand on stage, they promise billions, everyone claps.
And then nothing happens.
And then 5 years later, the money hasn't moved. It's vaporware funding. Did Dr. Essome see anything that suggests this time is different?
That is the skepticism any rational observer would have. And Dr. Essome anticipates that. He points to an immediate proof of concept that happened right there, in the room. They didn't just ask for $6 billion. They started with a $42 million win.
This is the Science Granting Council's initiative.
Correct, the SGCI. It's a partnership involving Canada's IDRC, Norway, the UK, the Wellcome Trust, Germany's DFG, and South Africa. And they announced $42 million specifically to back the implementation of STISA 2034.
Okay, so let's be real. $42 million is a tiny fraction of $6 billion. But you're saying the signal value is higher than the dollar amount.
Significantly higher. It means these major international players, governments, and massive trusts aren't just nodding politely. They are writing checks against this specific strategy.
It validates the roadmap.
It validates the roadmap. It proves that STISA 2034 isn't just some wish list sitting in a drawer in Ethiopia. It is an operational plan that global finance is willing to back.
And this links directly back to that brain drain issue we started with.
It does.
Because the standard view, and I think most of us grew up thinking this, is that brain drain is just physics. Talent flows to money.
Right.
If you are a brilliant geneticist in Nairobi and Harvard or Oxford offers you a lab, a grant, and a steady paycheck, you go. That's just rational behavior.
That's the conventional wisdom. But Dr. Essome flips that on its head. He argues that brain drain isn't a law of nature. It is a symptom of underinvestment. He believes that if you build the stadium, the labs, the grant infrastructure, the data centers, the players will stay.
So it's not that they want to leave, it's that they have nowhere to play at home.
Exactly. This $6 billion isn't just for gadgets. It is to build the ecosystem that makes staying in Africa a viable career choice for the world's best minds.
Right. If you can do world-class research in Lagos, why move to Boston?
Exactly.
Now, Dr. Essome isn't just watching this from the sidelines. The report mentions he's actually been drafted into the fundraising team, leveraging his background with the UN.
Yes, he is deeply involved. And that gives him this unique vantage point on the psychological shift happening here. He describes a move from consumption to ownership.
I want to dig into that because he used some really interesting visuals to explain it during the Calestous Juma executive dialogue. He contrasted the ivory tower with a futuristic city. Can we break that down?
This is a critique of how academia has historically operated in many developing regions. The ivory tower represents science that is secluded. You do the research, you write a paper, it gets published in a journal behind a paywall.
And maybe 5 other academics read it?
Right, and that's it. It stays in the tower. It is disconnected from the street.
It is science for scientists.
Right. The futuristic city visual represents science as a public good. It is about research that immediately flows out of the lecture hall and into the farm, into the hospital, and into the marketplace.
He had this flow chart that I thought was brilliant, the resource to rectifier analogy.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit technical, but the logic is really sound.
It is the most critical economic argument in the report. Yep. Think about the mineral wealth of Africa. We all know the story. Cobalt, coltan lithium.
Right.
For a century, the economic model has been extraction.
Right. You dig it up, you put it on a boat, you sell it cheap to a factory in Asia or Europe, and then you buy back the finished phone or battery at 1,000% markup.
That is the upstream-only model. Dr. Essome applies that same logic to knowledge. The upstream is the raw talent and the raw data. The midstream is this skills-bridging academia, turning that raw potential into capacity.
And the downstream?
The downstream is the public trust in made-in-Africa technology.
Yeah. So ownership means you don't just supply the raw materials for Silicon Valley to build AI. You refine that data and talent locally. You build the finished product.
And crucially, you consume it locally. That is the key. There's a quote from the session. We must communicate the value before we can harvest the results. You can't just expect people to trust African-made technology if you haven't done the work to build that credibility.
This leads us to what I found to be the most surprising part of the deep dive. I went into this expecting a discussion on, semiconductors and satellite uplinks.
Yeah.
But a huge chunk of this summit was dedicated to PR science communication.
It seems soft, doesn't it? You have billions of dollars on the line, and you are holding workshops on communication strategies.
It feels like an afterthought, like, oh, and let's send a press release.
But Dr. Essome calls misinformation a shadow pandemic.
That is a heavy term, a shadow pandemic.
It is accurate, though. I mean, look at agriculture. We have the technology right now to double yields in many parts of Africa using improved genetics and precision farming. The science is done. It works. It exists.
But the farmers aren't using it.
Because they don't trust it. If a smallholder farmer hears a rumor, maybe a conspiracy theory on WhatsApp, that these new seeds are a foreign plot to make them sterile, or that the technology will indebt them to a corporation,
they'll reject it.
Of course, the technology is useless if the adoption is zero.
So the science is dead on arrival without the communication strategy.
Precisely. That is why the Calestous Juma Executive Dialogue, the CJED, was central to the week. It brought together researchers, policymakers, and professional communicators. Their argument is that communication isn't a soft skill or an afterthought.
It's a strategic weapon.
It's a strategic weapon. If you want food security, you need a communication strategy to combat that shadow pandemic.
It is interesting to see who they are partnering with on this. I noticed a lot of collaboration with the Global South, particularly Asia.
This is a smart strategic move. If you look at the challenges rural Africa faces, low literacy rates in some areas, reliance on word of mouth, skepticism of Western corporate motives,
Right.
parts of Asia, like rural India, have solved these exact problems.
So instead of looking to the US or Europe for advice, who might not understand the context,
Yeah.
they're comparing notes with Rwanda or India.
Exactly. They had panels featuring voices from across the Global South. It turns potential economic rivals into collaborators because they are sharing the how-to of getting science into the hands of the people who need it most.
They're sharing best practices.
They're sharing best practices on how to bypass the misinformation barriers.
Okay, so let's pivot to the actual tech. We have the money, we have the communication strategy. What are they actually building? The report highlights something called the hidden gem, the Joint Action Plan.
This is where CAISD, Dr. Essome's organization, really steps up. They finalized a joint action plan with AUDA-NEPAD. It focuses heavily on artificial intelligence, but again, they are being very specific. This isn't AI for writing poetry or generating funny images.
So they aren't building a chatbot to write high school essays.
No, it is AI for agriculture, mining, and fintech. It is industrial AI.
I saw the details on the Smart Agriculture Initiative. They are targeting 200 hectares of land to test AI-driven farming. And the goals aren't vague. They are looking for a 25% yield boost.
And a target of $500 million in investments. I mean, that 25% yield boost changes lives.
Yeah.
That is the difference between subsistence, just growing enough to eat, and profit for a community.
There is also mention of an AI academic center of excellence being set up across South Africa, Botswana, and Namibia. This goes back to that midstream infrastructure we talked about.
It does. But there is a nuance here that Dr. Essome insists on. It is about ethical governance and indigenous knowledge.
Indigenous knowledge and AI. Unpack that for me. Because usually when we think of training an AI model, we think of scraping the entire internet, which is mostly Western content.
That is the problem. If you import an AI model trained in California to analyze soil samples in Namibia, it might fail because it doesn't understand the local context, the soil composition, or the local weather patterns.
Right.
Or if you use a medical AI trained on Western patients, it might misdiagnose local conditions.
So sovereignty here means training models on African data, solving African problems.
It is about avoiding algorithmic bias by building the algorithm yourself.
Yeah.
And it is about leapfrogging.
Leapfrogging, that's a classic development term, like how Africa skipped the landline phase and went straight to mobile phones.
Exactly. The plan here is to skip the desktop computer phase of AI. They aren't trying to put a laptop in every farmhouse. They are designing AI tools that work on the platforms people already use, WhatsApp, TikTok, mobile money apps.
That is incredibly pragmatic. You don't need to teach a farmer to code. You just need to give them a bot on WhatsApp that can look at a photo of a leaf and tell them what pest is eating it.
Exactly. That is how you get adoption. That is how you bridge the gap between the ivory tower and the field. You meet people where they are technologically.
Now, none of this works if the next generation doesn't care. The report mentions a presidential youth and AI and robotics competition that happened during the week.
And I love the framing here. It is easy to look at a robotics competition and think, oh, that's cute, the kids are building toys.
Or a photo op.
Or think of it as just a photo op for politicians.
Yeah.
But the report ties this directly to AUDA-NEPAD's EdTech Vision 2030.
Which is systemic?
Completely. You cannot have EdTech without electricity.
Yeah.
You cannot have robotics without a supply chain for microchips. The vision links the classroom to the power grid to the manufacturing plant.
It is closing the loop. If you inspire a kid to be a robotics engineer, you also have to build the factory where they can work in 10 years. Otherwise, they just take that degree and move to Germany.
That is the ultimate goal. Empowering the youth is the engine that makes the future self-sustaining. If that student in Addis or Lagos sees a clear path from their classroom to a world-class career in their own city, the brain drain stops.
Stops being a drain.
The drain becomes a circulation.
Yeah.
They might travel to learn, but they come back to build.
It really feels like the pieces are finally being assembled in the right order. You have the high-level strategy with STISA 2034.
Yep.
You have the funding vehicle with that $6 billion goal and the initial $42 million validation. You have the soft infrastructure of communication and public trust.
The components are there. Dr. Essome's closing sentiment in the report is incredibly powerful. He says Africa is at a crossroads. It is a choice.
A choice.
Will they own their innovation destiny, or will they let the brain drain and the consumption narrative define them for another 50 years?
It is a choice between being a user and being a maker. The source ends with the line, "The world is listening. It is time to speak."
And that speaks to the confidence in the room. They aren't asking for permission anymore. They are setting the agenda.
But I think the deeper question for you listening to this is about the invisible layer of innovation. We get obsessed with the hardware, the code, the steel, the silicon. But this deep dive suggests that true innovation sovereignty might actually depend on the messy human work of communication and trust.
If you build the most advanced AI in the world, and your own people don't trust it enough to use it, did you really build anything at all?
That is the billion-dollar question. Thanks for diving deep with us on this fascinating shift in the global landscape.
A pleasure.
We will catch you on the next one.